Hello everyone, welcome back. Today we are going to be starting our next unit. We're going to be taking a look at World War I. Now, of course, at the time, they did not call it World War I because that implies there would be a World War II. At the time, they called it the Great War, or sometimes referred to as the War to End All Wars. And yeah, you heard that right. There were actually people that thought this would be the last war that humans would ever engage in. And obviously, they didn't really know their history. But the fact is, this was one of the most climactic moments in world history. And this would be the deadliest event that had ever taken place up until this point. Now, sadly, of course, 20 years later, it would be overshadowed by World War II and even more hundreds of millions dead at the end of that war. But this war was a major turning point. The balance of power in Europe is going to completely start to shift as countries like Germany, spoiler alert here, as Germany loses, they are going to be plunged into an economic crisis that they eventually have to turn to a radical leader to get them out of, in Adolf Hitler, leading to World War II. So World War I is not nearly as studied as World War II, at least at our level, but it is extremely important in understanding World War II. And we have the World War I museum here in Kansas City. One thing that one of the tour hosts that I've been a few times has always said is that he doesn't like to call it World War II. He likes to call it World War I Part B. And the more I think about it, the more I actually agree, because this is really one story that is linking World War I and World War II together. And in fact, there were many people that actually fought in both wars. But in some very sad instances, you have, multi-generational, where you have a father who died in the First World War and a son who died in the Second World War. So before we jump into this, I guess just an overall disclaimer that, what we are talking about here, and often, even though it's presented as exciting and chaotic, at the end of the day, what we're talking about are people dying on a massive scale, and tens of millions of people dying from this conflict that frankly could have been avoided. And so, I want to remind you that when we study these things, make sure that you're really focusing on what should be focused on, how to prevent something like this happening in the future. This was a tragic event. It was nothing to romanticize or, nothing to cheer. This was something that was a tragic event for the entire globe, and we need to remember it as such in hopes to avoid it in the future. All right, enough of my soapbox. Let's go ahead and jump into the lecture. All right, here we go. So, World War I, again, the Great War. We're going to start off by talking about the causes of World War I. Easy way to remember this, there's this very simple acronym that kind of simplifies this. And again, wars do not happen for simple reasons. They are often very complex events that have many, many pressures coming from different directions, political and economic and social pressure. There's a lot of things that go into why war happens. But for our purposes, we are going to simplify it down to the four main causes. So let's take a look at those. First of all, militarism. Militarism. So militarism is this increasing focus that countries have on building up their military, but also seeing it as basically the source of their identity as well. And, there's nothing wrong with having a strong military, but what we're talking about is where everything in society is kind of built up towards making the military stronger. For instance, in Germany, leading up to World War I, most schools that especially young men would attend were war schools, were military schools. Everything that was done was in preparation and to create a soldier, basically. When countries start building up their militaries to the point we see preceding World War I, eventually they get to a point where, number one, they want to use it, so war becomes easier. But number two, it almost creates this frenzy in which everything about society is building up the military. And again, when that becomes your really your lone source of pride in a nation, again, you tend to want to use it. And so we don't really see diplomacy happening. After this big event we're about to talk about that kind of sparked the whole thing, countries weren't necessarily interested in diplomacy. They really thought that a war would frankly solve all their problems, that one gigantic battle would decide, finally who would be the dominant power in Europe. And instead of, creating more powerful countries, what it did was weaken all of them. Number two, alliances. Again, this was thought to strengthen countries, and this was thought to prevent war. But in reality, what ended up happening was it made war easier, because by this point, most of the world is divvied up into one of two groups for this conflict. And those alliances, Russia supporting France, supporting Britain, they're all tied together. And what ends up happening is when one of those countries is triggered, basically, there's an event that involves them, it triggers all those alliances. And so now all of a sudden you have a conflict that frankly is going to start up in a very small, chaotic region in southeastern Europe called the Balkans. And next thing you know, the most powerful countries in the world are fighting this conflict that they had nothing to do with in the beginning except for their alliances. So they thought it would be a safeguard against war. Surely no one would ever want to attack, country A because they are tied to country B. Well, it doesn't work like that. Eventually, events happen and things go on that, do trigger these alliances. But the result was that everyone was at war because of one singular event. So I put up here a graphic that shows kind of how deep this web goes and how many of these European nations are involved in this. So the initial conflict is going to take place in the Balkans and in a city called Sarajevo. And Serbia was wanting to extend their power to kind of levels that they had been in the Middle Ages. And so they had a lot of animosity towards this empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So we're going to see the first main event happen between Serbia and Austria-Hungary. But you can see the alliances there that Austria-Hungary has with Germany, and through Germany, the Ottoman Empire. On the other side, Serbia was backed up by Russia, and Russia had ties to both Britain and France. So again, this initial conflict that should have just been resolved between Serbia and Austria-Hungary now all of a sudden involves the most powerful militaries in the entire world. The third aspect, and again, we're covering the main causes of World War I, is imperialism, and we just got done with that unit in our class. But imperialism by this point, most of the world had been carved up, and there was mounting pressure on empires, of course, to have, find new markets, find new resources. But by this point, it does seem like most of the world is carved up. So this idea that we talked about in our third unit of social Darwinism, that, eventually the stronger countries emerge and the weaker countries get gobbled up, that's kind of the basis for imperialism. That same idea lasts here. So eventually, if you continue on with that thinking, eventually you get to the point where the big countries are going to try and gobble each other up, right? So eventually someone's going to have to become the winner, right? There has to be a winner. Not necessarily, right? In fact, like I said, this war is really going to damage most countries in Europe, at least economically. And so, this pressure, this competition for resources, for markets, it is something that adds pressure to the scenario leading to World War I. And then you have intense nationalism. Now, we talked about this in our imperialism unit as well, because there's a lot of words that often get thrown around that are supposed to be synonymous, but they are not. So nationalism, patriotism, you often have thrown in there. There's nothing wrong with patriotism. You know, loving one's country and supporting one's country is something that everyone should do. Nationalism goes one step farther than that. So this idea that any type of diplomacy or any type of debate with other countries, that your country should go first. It doesn't matter if you violate the borders of another country because you're bigger and badder and you're you. So, people that suggest, for instance, that America should, destroy alliances or can kind of trample on smaller countries just because we're bigger and better, that's nationalistic. All right. So what we're saying here is in the years preceding World War I, many of these European nations were experiencing strong nationalism, and especially in places like Germany. So they believed that their country was the best in the world, and again, that's a belief. There's nothing wrong with that, but that they should have the right to kind of do whatever they want. That they have the right to invade neutral countries. Okay, we're going to see Germany violate the neutrality of Belgium. Why? Because they were bigger and better, and they believed that they could. And again, that's a simplification, but nationalism, extreme belief that your country is the best in the world, and you can violate the rights of other countries because of that. That is called nationalism, and that is one of the big things that leads to World War I. So, militarism, and I do want you to know all four of these: militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism. Again, this is a simplified list. You could study the Great War your entire life and always be coming up with new causes. But for our purposes, this is, again, kind of the basic causes of the Great War. So by 1914, there were two major alliances that had formed. The first, which the United States will eventually enter, is called the Triple Entente. Okay, the Triple Entente originally was composed of France, Great Britain, and Russia. Now, they were, as I said, one of these alliances that later on they will add countries to this alliance. The United States will eventually come in 1917, but Italy will also join. Italy, they're kind of in an interesting position because they will actually switch sides during this war. Kind of a strange moment, but they very early on will switch sides and join the Triple Entente. The other side, I guess, from our perspective, the antagonist, but this is a war that I have to say, it's not clear cut on it's not clear cut on like a good guy and a bad guy. We do that with World War II, and I think it's much easier to do that with World War II, given how aggressive the Axis powers were. But here, man, and you guys will see here in just a second, it's hard to tell really who the so-called good guys and bad guys are. It just doesn't, it's not as clean as that. But on the other side of the coin are what we are going to refer to as the Central Powers. Sometimes they're called the Central Alliance or the Triple Alliance. But for our purposes, we're going to be calling them the Central Powers. And as you can see from the map, there's a reason they're referred to as the Central Powers, because they, for the most part, were in Central Europe. So the main country, the main military force behind this, and frankly, what you could argue is the greatest land army in the world at the time, is Germany. And Germany had really taken to industrialization, more so than most other countries, and had applied it because of the militarism in their country to making a war machine that's, they were pumping out weapons and soldiers like none other, and they were extremely strong, and frankly they almost won this war. But also joining Germany will be Austro-Hungary, the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Today, those are two separate countries, and neither of which are an empire, and that's thanks to this war. But the Austro-Hungarian Empire was a centuries-old empire that came out of these old family absolute monarch lines, and were frankly kind of grasping at straws. But this empire will die because of the results of this war. Also, the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire had been around for at least like 700 years at this point, and this is their last gasp of air. When they lose this conflict, they will officially collapse, and they will become the country that we know today as Turkey. So anyways, the Central Powers versus the Entente. You need to know who the major players are on each. You need to know what both sides was called. But Italy, again, you started out as a Central Power, but they did switch after some negotiation with land, and there was money exchange. And anyways, Italy, for the most part, would be on the Entente side, but they did begin as a Central Power. So this is the situation in 1914. In 1914, you have basically this pressure that is building, and I put a picture of, an old powder keg, right? How they used to store gunpowder. Very, very dangerous, right? And there's a lot of pressure because to spark a powder keg, full of gunpowder, all you need is truly just one little spark, one little match, and it's going to set the entire thing off. Well, that is Europe in 1914. There's so much pressure that has been built between these countries that it just is going to take, frankly, even one little thing to create havoc in Europe and to trigger those alliances and to allow a situation for these countries to use their militaries that, frankly, they have been desiring to use for a while. That event is going to come on June 28th, 1914 in the Balkans. We have some pictures here. In fact, I'm going to come back to this slide because explain exactly what's going on here in a second. So the man pictured in the upper right-hand corner is Archduke Franz Ferdinand, and he was basically the heir to the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Okay, so he was going to eventually become the head of that empire after Franz Joseph died or stepped down. Well, anyways, Franz Ferdinand was visiting Sarajevo, and Sarajevo was a city in the Balkans that had at one point belonged to the neighboring country of Serbia. There was a lot of animosity in Sarajevo about belonging to the Austro-Hungarian Empire. They were not too happy with it, and Franz Ferdinand knew that. In fact, I'm going to have you watch a little clip that you're going to, it's a dramatization, but it's an excellent video about even some of the preparations that Franz Ferdinand took when he toured Sarajevo, including wearing kind of superstitious medallions and things to protect him. He knew it was a dangerous situation in Sarajevo, that tension was high. Well, unbeknownst to him, a terrorist group from Serbia had been sent called the Black Hand. And it was a group of about half a dozen young men who received weapons from Serbia, and they were sent into Sarajevo to assassinate Franz Ferdinand. Now, at this point, I'm actually going to go back and show you a little bit here. So in the bottom left, you can see this map. The assassins, and it looks like there were 7 total, the assassins had taken different spots along the street that it had been published in the newspaper where Franz Ferdinand would be traveling. He was going to visit a couple different areas, go to I think a veterans hospital, and the idea for the terrorists, the Black Hand, was that they would space themselves out along this road, and the first terrorist was supposed to throw basically a grenade, kind of a homemade bomb, at the car. Now remember, these are not armored cars. In fact, that is a real photograph in the upper center. You can see the car itself where this event is going to take place in. It is an open carriage. That car does not move that fast either, okay? This is 1914, guys. This is not like they're not jumping in a Ford Mustang to get away here. So the car is going to be moving quite slowly, and they believe that they had enough time to throw a grenade to attack the car. It'd blow up. If they did not kill the Archduke with this first attempt, as the car traveled down the road, the other assassins were supposed to jump out and basically take out the Archduke. Well, it didn't really play out like that. The first young man jumped out, threw the grenade, forgot there was a timer on it, and so basically the grenade hit the back of the car and fell to the ground, exploding but not hurting Franz Ferdinand at all. I think it did hurt some bystanders and one of the soldiers, but the first assassin ran away, and as you're going to see in the video I posted, eventually took some cyanide, which is something he was trying to commit suicide, so he could not be captured, and jumped into the local river, the River Milchka. Anyways, it turns out that the cyanide was bad, and it ended up causing him to throw up. And the river was only about 4 inches deep at the time. So what that meant was that this first failed assassin eventually was captured, and the Black Hand, in the chaos of the moment, as the car kind of came by, the Black Hand, the other members, did not step out and attack Franz Ferdinand. So it was too chaotic of a scene, and they kind of all lost track of their focus. So basically what you have by afternoon is Franz Ferdinand knows there's been an assassination attempt on his life. He continues on with his day. He goes to the hospital and, greets people and smiles for photographs, things like that. The first assassin, or would-be assassin, has been arrested. The rest of the Black Hand has regrouped at a local park, and they're trying to figure out what to do because their attack has failed. One of their guys is now captured, and now they're thinking, what do we do? Do we run? Don't know. Now, at this point, this is where one of the most tremendous, just moments of fate occurs. Now, I will tell you, I've read conflicting stories on this, but eventually, one of the young members, the man in the upper right-hand corner, his name is Gavrilo Princip. He was actually a young man. He was dying of tuberculosis. He frankly didn't have much to live for, and was really he had kind of bolstered up on nationalist Serbian rhetoric, and he was ready to frankly give his life for his country in his own twisted manner. He ends up going off, and again, this part I've heard is disputed, so I want you to put a little asterisk on this, understand that. He goes off and actually goes to get a sandwich. I've read that he went to get a sandwich. It was getting to be lunchtime. When he goes to this delicatessen, he's gotten his food, he's standing there on the sidewalk, and by this time, the Archduke Franz Ferdinand has finished his tour of the hospital and is making his way back to the royal palace. You can see there in the map, the red line. That is the path of Franz Ferdinand's car. The star, basically the right turn that the driver takes, it was a wrong turn. They were not supposed to go down the road, but it just so happened that when the driver realized this, he stopped the car, tried to put it basically in reverse, tried to figure out the right directions, but it just so happened that the place he stopped that car was right in front of that delicatessen where Gavrilo Princip had gone to get lunch. Princip can't believe it. Here the Archduke is literally right in front of him, within the mere matter of feet, and he frankly walks up to the car, pulls out his gun, and he fires a couple rounds. The first hits the Archduke's wife, and very sadly, in fact, it does hit her in the stomach, which she was carrying their unborn child, a very kind of tragic part of this, but killing her as well. And then he fires another round that strikes the Archduke in the upper chest, the throat area, and eventually he will die as well. The picture in the lower right-hand corner is one of the most important moments in world history that is one of the first to be captured on film. You can see in the lower right-hand corner a man being arrested on the right-hand side of that photograph. That is Gavrilo Princip moments after he has fired the fatal shot that will ultimately spark the the Great War. So, like I said, this was a powder keg, and what eventually happened is that because of this shot, over the next few weeks, as they are investigating whether, as Austria-Hungary is investigating exactly what happened, but also trying to identify if another country was involved, over the next few weeks, once they identify that Serbia was the one to give the weapons to these terrorists, it triggers a number of events. And let me kind of take you through that fairly quickly. I'm not expecting you to know this. This is just for your chronological understanding. So to kind of simplify it, what ends up happening is Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia, which triggers Serbia's alliance with Russia. Russia declares war on Austria-Hungary. Austria-Hungary declares war on them. Germany comes in on Austria-Hungary's side, and they declare war on both Serbia and Russia. Well, once Germany declares war, then you have France mobilizing, and once France mobilizes, Britain has to mobilize as well. Well, Germany sees that, and they begin to declare war and mobilize against France, which causes both France and Great Britain to declare war against them. And as you can see here, by August 6th, I mean, all this happens within the space of a month. Okay, by August 6th, we have basically every major country in Europe at war. This is worst case scenario. I mean, these are the strongest militaries in the world, and they are about to do all out battle. And frankly, none of them understand the power that they hold. And what we're going to see is the worst destruction in the history of mankind. So next time we get together, we will talk about how the war plays out in its early stages, and how devastating of a conflict it would be. Thanks for tuning in, and let me know if you have any questions.